Hi, everyone. This is Adele Newton. I'm the Executive Director of CSCAN InfoCan, and I'm really pleased today to welcome all of you and also our speakers to this webinar on career options in teaching track. So our speakers are Jacqueline Smith from the University of Toronto. Jacqueline is an associate professor in the teaching stream in the Department of Computer Science, and she's been teaching a variety of CS courses since 2012. Jacqueline's primary interests are in teaching introductory CS classes and fostering an inclusive classroom environment. And Jacqueline is also interested in teaching about teaching CS, which we're doing today, particularly for teaching assistants and new faculty. Also joining us today is Kemi Ola, who is an assistant professor of teaching at the University of British Columbia, and Gabriela Mosquera, who's an instructor in the Faculty of Computer Science at Dalhousie University in Halifax. I'm going to take myself off video and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Adele. So our format that we have planned for today, we're going to answer a few of our own questions that we came up with, kind of go around and have everyone share our answers. And then we have quite a bit of time for questions that those of you who are attending have. So we'll talk first, but I think you can use the Q&A functionality and or the chat to ask your questions. And Adele is going to help us keep track of those as they come up. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about was, or the first question that we were going to answer is, what does a teaching track position look like at your institution? And what are the responsibilities of the role? And how does it compare to tenure track faculty positions? So who wants to, Kemi, do you want to start us off?
I'll jump right in. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kemi. And so I'm at UBC, and the teaching track positions are also tenure track positions. So the way we distinguish between teaching faculty and research faculty is really by saying research stream and teaching stream. So someone in computer science who is teaching typically would teach 4 courses, 2 in the fall, 2 in the spring. And they would also have a service load that's about 20%. So 60% of our load is teaching, 20% is service, and the other 20% is what we call educational leadership. Now, educational leadership can take a variety of forms. Some people engage in the scholarship of teaching and learning. Other people design new curriculums. Others decide to plan events. Other people work on program level changes, so like assessing programs. So I think the main difference that I would say between our roles and their roles is that we have, someone wants me to speak a bit louder. Hello, can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay, sorry about that. So basically the main difference I would say is that educational leadership piece. We're responsible for actually designing new courses, implementing those courses, and evaluating those courses. And then I think the other main difference is the salary. So I'll pass it over to Gabriel now.
Thanks. There's quite a bit of similarities, I think, with Dalhousie. So at Dalhousie in University in Halifax, they're pretty much the same, both different tracks. The difference is, so one you have more of a focus on teaching, the other one there's the research component that you give more of a focus on. However, both tracks can do research, so an instructor can decide that they also want to do research, but it's not a requirement, but it's a plus that you can do if you want to. You do have usually a workload of, depending on your university, I think it's called university administration duties. So you can have either 5 courses or 6 courses. If you have 5 courses as part of your workload, that usually means that you're also a part of 2 faculty committees. This could be like, for example, tenure and promotion committee, undergraduate committee, graduate committee, particular graduate program committees as well. And that's just part of what you do. In addition to that, you also have kind of again, that leadership component to it. So you can design courses, propose courses as well to be added to the curriculum, make changes. Like, for example, in my case, I'm also in charge of the web development curriculum at the Faculty of Computer Science. So part of my job is also, because of my experience, it's part of going through all of the courses and make sure that we're up to date with the material as well. And then you can also do extra stuff like being a part of university-wide councils and that. Yeah, but they're essentially pretty much the same. It's just the emphasis is what differentiates them. Yeah.
Yeah, so at the University of Toronto, things are quite similar to what Kemi and Gabriella have already talked about. So the teaching stream positions here, so we have the teaching stream, and then the other faculty positions are the tenure stream is what we call them. The teaching stream has the same professorial ranks and all that. We have, instead of tenure, we have what's called continuing status, which I believe is almost the same as tenure, but has like, you can also, there's something about a provostial committee deciding there's nothing left on campus that you could possibly teach, which as a computer scientist has not been something that I found concerning. So yeah, so we have that same kind of breakdown that Kemi mentioned at UBC with the 60% teaching, 20% service, and 20%, we call it pedagogical and professional development. And that's one of the really big pieces that I think people, when they're getting into thinking about the teaching career, are lacking because you haven't had opportunities yet. So that's, it's very open for us what that means. That can be, it can be doing disciplinary research, it can be doing educational research, it can be initiatives around curriculum development, around really anything that you're interested in, which is actually one of my favorite parts of this job, is that like there's a piece of 20% of my job is the things that I care about related to teaching. So that's that 20%. Other than that, we are very similar to the tenure stream faculty positions. You know, we have the same voting rights in the university. We do the same kinds of service, although I tend to do a lot more undergraduate related service because that's my areas of interest. But we're not prevented from being involved with graduate students as well. Yeah, I think that's, I don't have much else to say beyond what Gabrielle and Kemi have already said on that one.
We have
So,
one chat. Just that out. That kind of goes with what you're saying too.
Oh, is it permanent or a contract position? That question. Yeah. So the teaching track positions are permanent positions at U of T. We certainly also have people who teach on contracts. They're not faculty positions, like people who come in and teach on a term by term contract when we need different teaching gaps filled, which I suspect is probably similar to the other institutions.
Yeah, we call them sessional lecturers. Those are the positions are just contract based. So you're hired for the semester to teach a course. You can have multiple sessional lecture contracts on for a single person in a given term. I actually started that way. But with instructors, it's a permanent position, and it's technically also tenure, although we call it career stream. But it's a tenured instructor position.
I see there's a few more questions. Maybe we'll go through what we're planning to talk about, and then we'll come back to all of these now because I think they kind of all kind of fit with this, and some of them might be answered by our next question. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was for each of us, our path to our current position. So the next thing, you know, what was the path to your current position? So maybe we'll start with you, Gabriella.
Sure. Well, my first interest in teaching actually started a long time ago. I was 17 years old in Ecuador, and I volunteered to teach at a rural high school. I remember I was actually teaching math every Saturday at the school, and I really liked the experience. I wasn't 100% sure that part of the experience that I liked was the actual teaching, but just as a whole, I just loved it. I loved the interaction with the students. I loved having to think outside of the box because, teaching math, these are students that can't really afford calculators. So just thinking of fun ways as well to get students to like math. And then it was when I was in my undergrad, I started TAing. and really starting to like the process and just wanted to get more experience with that. Of course, I started TAing right on my last term, came to Canada. And as what usually happens, one of the easiest way for you to kind of stay on campus, stay focused on your grad school in a sense, is TA. So that's how I moved on to that. And as a part of that, I had just out of nowhere, I had a conversation with my thesis supervisor at the time, Dr. Tammy Meredith. And I mentioned that I really like teaching and I might want to pursue something else. And my supervisor was like, well, let's get you to teach. I'm going to give you my course. And that was it. She believed in me and just kind of handed me the course and said, you're going to be the instructor for this course. And that's how I started as a sessional lecturer. And I like to say that I caught the bug that way. And I started mainly focusing on computer science courses for non-computer science students, which again, gets you to think outside of the box and how to explain programming concepts and things like that. And then 10 years later, I got into a permanent position at Dow. So, but the whole time being sessional, nonstop, it's kind of cool. Yeah.
Wow, my situation is a bit similar to Gabriela's. I completed my master's degree, went back to Nigeria and taught for a year and fell in love with teaching. So when I came to Canada to do my PhD, I really wanted to focus on PhD regarding educational technologies because I had done some work on that in my master's. But then I got sidetracked and I ended up doing things with visualization, but I still had that bug for teaching because when you were an undergrad, you helped your friends. Like even when I was in high school, I was like helping people with calculus. So I started teaching on the side. I was a TA's TA. So we have this thing where we train TAs and we use senior TAs to train them. And so I had a TA fellowship that I did, and then I became a TA for TA. And then I got the opportunity to teach as a sessional in my department while doing my PhD. And so I did this thing where I was teaching a course, working in industry, and working on research all at the same time. And each week I would ask myself, which of these three things do you love? And I kept on going back to teaching. And so then I was like, okay, I need to find a tenure track teaching position. And then right when I was about to graduate, there were a couple of positions. There was one at UBC, one at Manitoba, and I think the third one was at Carleton, and all came up like 4 to 5 months before me finishing my PhD. And I applied to those three. So that's how I got on this track.
Yeah, so I have a similar sounding story. I guess I finished my undergrad and I started a master's kind of just in part because I couldn't imagine myself working as a software developer, although I did do it for a year and it was I was like, yeah, I was right. That's not for me. But I started TAing during my master's and I really liked it. And I was like, well, I really like teaching. I wonder if you can like do that as a career. And my partner happened to have done his undergrad at U of T, and so he said, yeah, I had these instructors as an undergrad who were like, all they did was teaching. That was their job. And I was like, oh, that sounds really cool, but like, I don't know if that'll could ever happen to me. So I started, I guess I was, had the right timing. I started thinking about teaching right as CS enrollments were starting to go up, and suddenly there was a bunch of sessional teaching positions available. And so I taught as a sessional for a few years, and then after finishing my master's, so I do not have a PhD, and I don't plan to get one. After finishing my master's, I taught for 3 years and then applied for a few teaching positions and ended up at U of T. So I've been here since 2015. Yeah, so the third question we have is just if everyone can share some advice that you have for students who are interested in pursuing a teaching track career. I'll just put that in the chat so people know what we're talking about. Kemi, do you want to go first on this one?
So something that I did was when I realized, okay, I didn't want to go into industry, I didn't want to be a research prof, I wanted to be a teaching prof. I now started to do research at teaching prof positions in Canada. And something else I did was I contacted individuals at that institution who had been recently hired into the position. And I just said, hey, are you available for a chat? I really want to learn more about the position at your school. And of course, I still remember the person I contacted here at UBC, it was Megan. She was like, sure, let's have a conversation. So we had that conversation even before I had applied to the job. So I think one advice is find out more about the institution by reaching out to people who currently hold the position, especially people who were recently hired. So like in the last 2 years, and you could just find that information by looking at the website. The other thing I will say is get some teaching experience, because we've had these teaching positions in Canada for a little while now. Most of them require you to have taught, to be the sole instructor or the lead instructor for at least 1 or 2 courses at the minimum. While research faculty don't actually need to have taught before getting their positions, teaching faculty need to show that they can teach small courses and big courses. And then
lose a little bit of that nervousness that you might get. And then, try to see opportunities for advancing your credentials. Oftentimes universities have lots of teaching workshops that you can take for free. I know a lot of universities in Canada have the certificate for university teaching and learning, which is free when you take it as a student. And part of that program kind of teaches you how to create a teaching dossier, how to design courses, how to teach courses, how to, what's the difference between blended and hybrid modes of teaching, develop a teaching philosophy. So all the things that you're going to need to apply for those positions, this program kind of teaches you. And you'd be surprised with how few candidates have that certificate. And that's actually a huge plus, because it means you have a bit, not just experience, but you also have training in teaching. And see what options, especially now that we've gone online since COVID, there's tons of online workshops, online courses that you can take on teaching. I've done a couple for the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. Their Digital Society School has a lot of online courses and certifications that you can take, and they give you a discount if you're a student. So I would say taking advantage of that student status definitely helps out right now. Yeah. Oh, the certificate. Anika, I'm not a doctor. I don't have a PhD either, although I do want to go into a teaching PhD actually. But the certificate is called the Certificate of University Teaching and Learning. So when you're doing a search, just kind of type your institution's name next to it. And if your institution has it, it should show up. But I know a lot of universities in Canada have that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess mine is along those same lines. I guess one thing that's kind of a different take on getting teaching experience is I would say get a variety of teaching experience. So if you can teach, I think one of you said small versus big classes, but also introductory versus upper year courses. As much experience as you can get, especially a variety of it, is great. The other things that I wanted to say was about starting to take a scholarly approach to your teaching. So maybe the first time you teach, you're just kind of getting through it, and that's absolutely the right way to do it. But as you teach more, we know a lot about how to teach well, and computer science education research is a very active community. So I actually have some links I'll share with you before we finish today, but there's an upcoming technical symposium for the Special Interest Group in Computer Science Education, SIGC, which is in early March. There's a $70 US registration fee for the virtual attendance for students, if you're interested in that sort of thing. There's also a Western Canada Computing Education Conference that's coming up. I'll have a link to that as well. And as Gabriella was saying, your institution's teaching and learning center, like there's so much out there about what we know about best practices in teaching and ongoing research on, you know, how to do different kinds of teaching well. That engaging with that is something certainly that when I'm on a hiring committee is something that I really like to see people having done. The last thing I would say is take opportunities as much as you can to get feedback. So if there's someone who can come watch your lecture or who can give you feedback on a syllabus you've created, if once you're into the application stage, if you created a dossier, getting some feedback on that, any feedback that you can get from anyone is going to be really valuable. And it also, I think, encourages this more reflective approach to your teaching rather than just saying, students liked me, you know, I did it, I'm done, good. It's to kind of, you know, as I've been teaching for 10 years now, and I always feel like there's things I can do better. And so that kind of process is, I think, a really important part of a successful teaching track position. I'm just going to drop a link in the chat to, I just made some Google slides, but they just have links on it. They have our email addresses as well as links to that SIGC technical symposium I mentioned, the Western Canadian Computing Education Conference, and then also a couple other things I thought were really interesting. A link on developing your teaching dossier, which just came out, offered online by eCampus Ontario, I think for anyone who's interested. And there's also an upcoming new and aspiring, almost a new and inspiring, but I'm sure you're also inspiring teachers, new and aspiring educator workshop, which is in a couple weeks, which I think has a virtual option. That's all linked on that link I just posted in the chat. Yeah, so I see there's a bunch of questions. So let me just take a look at, let's see. So maybe we can start with, there's questions about PhDs and research. So maybe we can just talk first about the PhD requirement. Let's start with that one. Hang on, let me just.
I'm happy to help with the questions too.
Okay,
so
sure.
One of the questions was, obviously, do you need a PhD? And most, you do not. But the other question associated with that was, is there a difference in payment if you have a master's versus a PhD in salary? So maybe you could answer that.
I can start, I think, because I was thinking about that. It's a weird answer because it's yes and no. Yes, in the sense that coming in, usually a PhD. So just to give you context, at Dow, when you're hired for a teaching position, regardless of whether it's instructor or professor, we have a thing called the Y value to determine the pay that you're going to be getting for the position. So just answering a post doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get an X amount of money, because at the end of the day, the Y value is always something that's calculated. You might get that, or you might get more. You don't get less. So it's kind of like telling you in the post, you won't get less than this, or with that contract. So with the Y value, if you have two people that have the exact same, let's say, teaching experience, and one of them has a PhD and the other one doesn't, then technically the one that has a PhD can get more pay. However, if the one that doesn't have a PhD has more experience, the one that doesn't have a PhD can get more pay than the one that does. So that's why I said yes and no, because at the end of the day, experience can bring you up in terms of your salary. Yeah.
So the answer at Dow anyway is it depends.
At Dow, it depends. Yeah. Y value helps you out there.
What about UBC?
I would say that there's a starting salary. UBC hasn't hired a person who doesn't have a PhD into the tenure track teaching position in the last 4 years. The last 4 people that were hired, myself included, all had PhDs. But the person before that just had a master's. And so I think the starting salary is determined by the union, but a lot of people, based on their experience, can negotiate a higher starting salary.
So experience also counts as much as anything at UBC. And at UT?
Yeah, so we don't require a PhD at the U of T downtown campus, we do not require a PhD. I think at least one of the suburban campuses does, and I know there are other institutions that do require a PhD. One of the reasons that I've seen for that is around how much of an expectation they have that you'll be supervising student research. So some institutions do still want a PhD, and also there's reasons around how, especially if the teaching track is new, around how that person would be kind of treated by the rest of the faculty. So it's not just a blanket, it's not required anywhere, but it's kind of, it depends on the institution. So for us at U of T, we don't require a PhD. In terms of pay, so the teaching stream salaries are lower than the tenure stream salaries, but they have been going up in the last few years. So our more recent hires, I believe, are getting a better starting offer. And the reason for that is that there are now more teaching positions. So one of the reasons that tenure stream salaries can get higher is people will have multiple offers from schools that are competing at a higher level for each other. And so, we can, tenure stream salaries, one of the reasons they can be high is they're trying to get someone over another school with a high salary. And we've just started to see that happening here, where we're getting candidates who have competitive offers from other places. And so my feeling is that the teaching stream salaries are going up, but I haven't seen that really take off yet, but there is a bit of a climb.
And that was one of the questions. In fact, it was the first question that usually happens in webinars like this is, what's the difference in salary between teaching track and research track? So there is a differential for sure.
Yeah.
And that's true at Dalhousie and UBC as well?
Yeah, I would say that at Dow, it is, yeah.
And Kemi?
I would say that's the same. And something else I would say is, because we are all like public employees, anyone who gets paid over $70,000, the university is required to post their salary. So you can actually go online and find out how much I got paid and how much a research faculty who's been at UBC for 4 years also got paid. And you can look at the people who got hired last year and figure out what was the starting salary for research faculty and someone who's teaching. And then the other thing I would say is that UBC doesn't require a PhD, but it is preferred. And based on the last 4 hiring decisions, it seems that's the preference of the people on the committee.
One of the other questions that came up, and Jacqueline, you referenced this a few minutes ago, was whether teaching stream people also are able to supervise graduate students. And I'll start at the top of my screen with Gabriella and ask you.
Yes, you definitely can. The one rule that we have at Dow is that you can only supervise students up to the degree that you have. So in my case, I currently have a master's, so I can supervise undergraduate honor students and I can supervise master students. And because in my case, because I'm an instructor, there's no limit on how many students I can supervise. Obviously, they kind of want you to keep that in mind and also consider your workload so that you're not overextending yourself. But yes, you can definitely supervise students.
Thanks. And at U of T?
Yeah, so we absolutely can. The limit for us is that we typically don't have access to the funding that allows us to support graduate students. But I have colleagues with a colleague with a master's degree who supervises a PhD student, so that's not a limitation here. But she co-supervised because then she had a tenure stream colleague who had the ability to fund the student.
And at UBC?
I would say exactly what Jacqueline said, and that's the main thing is funding. Teaching track faculty are less likely to get the funding to supervise a master's student or a PhD student, but they have supervised undergraduate projects.
Thanks. There's another question about what does tenure in teaching track means? Is it the same as research? And how many years are typically needed to get tenure? So Jacqueline, I'm gonna start with you.
Yeah, so it's 6 years. I was like, I just got it. How long was that? So yeah, it's the same timeline for teaching stream tenure here at U of T as it is for the tenure stream. And the only difference, I looked this up, and this is not the official difference, but the official difference, I think, is something like a provostial committee can be struck to determine that there's nothing left on campus that you could teach. And that is the only other reason beyond the tenure rules that you could be removed from your position. So it's effectively tenure. And it follows the same, for us, it follows the same timeline. There's a third year interim review where you get some feedback to make sure you're on track, and then the tenure or continuing status review at the end of your, by the end of your 6th year.
And at UBC, Kemi?
So at UBC, for teaching track faculty, it's 5 years. For research track faculty, it's 7 years.
So it's actually less.
Yeah, it's less for us.
And at Dell?
Dell is a little bit different. It depends. Usually, sometimes it depends on the funding that's available to the university or to the faculty at that time. Usually, it is for teaching track faculty. It tends to be either 3 years or 5 years to then move on to tenure. But you could also go 2 years and then move on to tenure. It depends on how much experience you have from before. So this is, again, where experience kind of comes in, and it could be a factor, which is why getting experience teaching, it's always a huge plus. For teaching faculty, for research faculty, I think the same thing. It kind of depends, because I've seen tenure faculty that became tenure after their first year, sometimes after 3 years. But again, it depends on experience. In that case, it also depends a lot more on funding and on projects and supervision that you have at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, can I just jump in there and say one more thing? Even though the clock is officially 5 and 7 years, a lot of people go up for tenure before. Mm-hmm. And so the latest you can submit your application is at 5 and 7 years, but a lot of people go before.
Thank you. Here's a question. Are teaching track faculty positions common outside of North America? Jacqueline?
I don't think I have an answer to that. I know of most of the people I know are in North America. So I certainly know there's many in the US. But maybe my colleagues here who aren't, we were talking about our, knowledge of things, and I'm just don't have any.
Do you have any knowledge on that?
And I would say that in Ecuador, it has been for a bit, and only in a few universities, like I think the Universidad de San Francisco, which is in Quito, I think they have started to have some teaching track faculty members for a few years now. I don't know if it's at the same level that what we're seeing. Like, we're seeing a lot of positions starting to come up in North America. I don't know if there's that same number, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is, but there's definitely started to be an interest on that.
What about you, Kemi? Are you aware?
So I would say that when we talk about teaching positions, there's two main flavors. There's being a tenure track teaching professor at an R1 institution, and then there's being a professor at a small liberal arts college or a place where research is not the focus. So a lot of the teaching jobs that we see in the United States, you still have to do a little bit of research, but your primary focus is undergraduate teaching because it's undergraduate school. So even when we look international, like when we go to Brazil, because I have a colleague from Brazil, and also in Africa, where I'm originally from, a lot of the institutions that are primarily focused on undergraduate education, most of their positions align with what the three of us have been talking about, which is 60% of their portfolio is teaching undergraduate students, and then they only have to do like 20% research, 20% service.
And of course, you could always look and see, as universities outside of North America advertise, what they're advertising for, what kind of positions they're advertising for, if there's somewhere specific that you're interested in going.
Sorry, I always remember something after. Australia does have some. I distinctly remember seeing some job boards, and Australia had some positions similar to what we have in Canada and the US.
Oh, good to know. Here's a question. Thank you all so much for this presentation. I'm in my undergrad going directly into a PhD program in September, and I'm feeling a little lost. What else should I do besides TA or trying to teach? I have a focus on CS education research, and I'm wondering if that might give me a competitive edge for teaching positions in the future. Kemi, you had talked about doing research in that area, right? And did that give you an edge when you were looking?
Well, it does give candidates an edge, but most of the people who do computer science education research, CER, go into research positions. So if you're interested in doing a teaching position, then at some point before you graduate, you need to have actually taught at least 1 or 2 courses. I remember 3 years ago, I was on the hiring committee, and we had a couple of applicants from North America, and we had someone who that was their research, but had only taught 1 course. And we had another person who had taught like 3 courses and had not done as much research in that area. And we tended to go with the person with more teaching experience.
So sounds like the advice is, in addition to TAing, look to teach.
Yeah.
To get that experience. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think the reason why is we're hiring you for, the first thing is your ability to teach. And then secondly is that educational leadership. So if you've shown us you can be an educational leader, but haven't demonstrated your teaching, then it really is a gamble.
So this is an interesting question. And generally are teaching track teachers considered to be second-class citizens at universities? And he was specifically asking about U of T, so I'm going to ask Jacqueline first and then the others.
Yeah, so at U of T, I do not feel like a second-class citizen. I sometimes feel like I have too much. Maybe I should have less say in our undergraduate programs. But I'm on sabbatical right now. So we do have sabbaticals here. We have full voting rights at faculty meetings. I tend to, engage less with things that I'm not involved in. So I tend to not have, go and have my strong opinions about graduate student recruiting or anything like that. But if I do have something to say on it, I do feel heard in the department. So I certainly don't feel in my department that the teaching stream is second class in any way. And I know that that's not the case everywhere. So we have a big group, we have a pretty strong group here. And that definitely, I think we have probably one of the best, I'm just gonna toot my own horn here, we have probably one of the best environments I can imagine.
Well,
every other places are similar, but yeah, it's a really lovely place to be a teaching stream faculty member. I do know other places that's not the case. That is something to get a sense of if you're applying somewhere, is to talk to, especially as Kemi was saying, talk to the new people. They can give you some interesting insight.
Like every company, every university, and every department will have their own culture. So I think it will depend strongly on that. Gabriella, what about Adele? Is it considered second class?
I would like to say no, but unfortunately I do have to say that at times you do meet people where that is a yes. And I would say in my case, already being a female identifying person going into a male dominated field, you're already going to have a few of the hurdles that you're going to have to jump. So every now and then, now being an instructor, you do kind of meet those people that do kind of consider you a second class citizen. But it all comes down to proving yourself in a way. So for example, in my case, I kind of started venturing out as well and making sure that I make a little bit more of an impact, because in terms of teaching, I'd like to help students. That's primarily what I love about it. I love that feeling of a student saying like, oh, okay, I got it. This makes sense. I love that feeling. So, you know, I teach at Dow. I'm also teaching for the Adapt Workshop Series, which is a set of workshops done between Ryerson and here in Atlantic Canada in collaboration with St. Mary's University. I also volunteer for Girls Learn Code, or I think it's called now Code Canada. And I'm also involved in a lot of EDI initiatives as well in terms of the Equity Council at Dow. I'm doing a fellowship with Jacqueline as well with Duke University, which was kind of nice to sort of meet her during that live session. And it just all comes down to not letting it get to you, and just keep your focus on what's really important, which is, you know, your teaching, your career, how you help your students, and how you kind of come up with new sort of initiatives or new novel strategies to teach. And at the end of the day, have fun with it and enjoy it, really.
What about at UBC?
I would say it's a wonderful place to work. And I don't think as a department, or even at the university level, that tenure track teaching faculty are looked down upon, because we have the same voting rights when it comes to decisions in the department. You will find one or two people who think you're a second-class citizen, but as a whole, I've not had that experience. And something else I would say is, when you love your job and you do your job well, research faculty come to you and ask you questions of, how can I do what you do in the classroom? So I think it's just being in a community and knowing what you bring to the table.
So I'm looking at all the other questions here. To answer the question, we are recording this and it will end up on our website. And I will also post the links that Jacqueline put in on the website and send it to everyone who registered for the webinar so that you have it. I'm just looking at it. I've noticed, and I think this was already answered, but let's just make sure. I noticed that some schools have 2 tracks for teaching, a lecturer and a teaching professor. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference? So Jacqueline, I'm gonna start with you on that one.
Sure. Yeah, so I think sometimes there's no difference. Sometimes these positions vary by institution. So actually, when I got hired at U of T, I was a lecturer, because they brought in the professorial titles like 6 months after I started. So I was a lecturer for 6 months, and then I became an assistant professor teaching stream. So at some places it's just a title, but I think that can be one of the things you see. It's an indicator about what the position is like. So I think, like, asking, you know, if you're interested, asking someone about what the position is at that institution will give you more information than the title will.
Thanks. And Adele?
I think at Dell, some faculties have a lecturing position, but in computer science, we mainly just have instructors and professors, and that's about it. And then the seasonal lecturers, which are the contract lecturing positions for one class and one term. But I think the arts and social sciences faculty might be one. I think they're one of the faculties that I think I want to say that I saw a lecturing position. But I don't think they're quite common at Dow. At least they haven't been for a while now.
Right. And at UBC?
So I can speak for UBC, SFU, Simon Fraser, and UVic, which is on the island, and say that they do have the 2 different kinds of teaching positions. The ones that are tenure track, which means you can get tenure, and the ones in which you're either teaching a given course for a semester, or you're on a fixed term contract for like 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years, depending. The main differences is that is term limited, and you don't get benefits like a huge professional development account or startup funds, and you're not able to vote on various things.
So I know that the reason for offering this webinar is to make students aware, and also faculty members who supervise students aware of opportunities in teaching track. And what I'm getting from all of you is that things are evolving in terms of teaching track positions at all of the universities. So even things that are true today may change over the next little while, depending on competition for those positions, number of students that apply as undergrads, so that people, am I correct in that the positions and the situation is evolving?
Oh yeah, definitely. At Dow, for example, we got a huge grant from the province, and in computer science, we're going to be looking to hire, I think, about 50 new faculty positions over the next 10 years. I know it's a high number. I might be exaggerating. It might be something like 30. But it's a huge number of positions that are going to be coming up over the next few years. And I would assume that that would be something that we might start to see in other institutions as well across Canada.
And Jacqueline, you've talked a lot about how things have evolved from when you first started to where you are now. What do you see changing going forward?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I can see the ways that even the bar for who gets hired, right, has been going up. Like, I feel like maybe I would still be above the bar, but like some of my colleagues did not have the experience that we're expecting people to have now when they got hired, and I think this is a good thing, right? I think we're the idea of a teaching track position is maturing. More institutions are having them. They're getting to be better jobs, right? Like, I think there are places where they've existed and they've just been kind of, bodies to teach without kind of this idea of, doing this great quality teaching, having this professional development or these service roles within the department, within the institution or the community. So there's, they're really kind of developing in a really interesting way, and I think that's going to be good for people who are pursuing them in the future. There'll be more of them. I think there'll be it's the institutions where they're not necessarily as well established, they'll be getting more established. I think as they become more competitive, the salaries will go up, right? There's just a lot that's going to happen in terms of the evolution of these positions. So yeah, I think it's a really exciting path. So.
And Kemi, would you agree to all of that, with all of that?
I would agree as well. And I would say that the place where I did my PhD, Western in Ontario, they just have a fixed 5-year contract that's renewable. But I know the union there has been lobbying to try to make it tenure track. So I know things are changing at different institutions.
So there are two last questions here about tenure track. The first one is, what are the promotion criteria for the teaching track positions, which is not really tenure track, but for the teaching track? So Kemi, what are the promotion criteria at UBC?
So you're evaluated on your teaching, primarily your teaching. So you need to have good teaching evaluations, peer evaluations, be a reflective teacher, something Jacqueline talked about early on. And then the other part is your educational leadership. So you need to demonstrate your impact and provide evidence for how you have excelled in whichever area of educational leadership that you want to pursue. And that differs. I had a colleague who went the route of publishing papers, another one who helped create our Master in Data Science program, another person who just created a couple of courses. So it really does depend on the individual. But you need to have that evidence and you need to show impact. And
at U of T?
It's the same thing. We have different labels for it. We don't say educational leadership so much as this pedagogical and professional development, which educational leadership is part of that. And yeah, the way that people achieve that is so varied, really just aligned with whatever you're interested in. And then the other significant component is demonstrated excellence in teaching.
And would that be the same at Dal, Gabriella?
I think so. I actually have the list here of what to look at. So at Dell, we have, immediately when you asked the question, I was like, I have that document. So for teaching tracks, so for instructors, we have, you have instructors, you can be promoted to senior instructor, and then you can be promoted to UTF, which is University Teaching Fellow. So for instructor, Coming in, you're expected to have, just like Jacqueline and Kemi said, good teaching evaluations. You should also be involved in material development, whether that is curriculum development or course development, or just having your input in those kind of meetings. You also have to, meet your usual duties, so meet deadlines, perform the duties that you should perform. So, for example, your assigned committees, their deadlines, all of that, just for instructors. So that's just coming in, what you're expected to do. If you want to be promoted to senior level, so this is what you would have to also make sure you do before you get to that stage, not while you're senior level. So before you get to that stage, it's still the same, maintain good teaching sort of evaluations, also advise students, supervise students if possible, but regularly advise students. So that could mean being a co-op advisor, undergraduate advisor, or graduate advisor as well. So being involved in those committees too. Teach a variety of courses. So just like with what Jacqueline mentioned at the beginning, just making sure that you teach first year, second year, third year, fourth year, master's level courses if possible as well. And then also creating instructional material. So here you do have the expectation of developing courses and creating material for those courses. And then if you want to be promoted to UTF from senior, then you're also expected to be involved in university-wide committees or councils or chair committees as well. Here you have more of a expectation of a dedication to teaching. So being involved in teaching workshops, courses, conferences, and the teaching workshops can be teaching workshops for other faculties or for other faculty members or for TAs, for example. So here's where you would have a bit more of an involvement with the Center for Teaching and Learning at your institution. Yeah.
So one last question before I thank you. Would all those requirements be the same for achieving tenure then? Yeah, that all the same requirements for achieving promotion would be those for achieving tenure as well.
Mm-hmm.
I will also point out that CSCAN InfoCan has instituted instituted a new award this year, and that's a teaching award for the first time. So as the universities evolve, so is the recognition of the importance of teaching in addition to research. So we do have a new award that we'll be awarding for this year. So I'm excited about that as well. I want to thank all of you for being, giving us your time today as panelists and the knowledge and the experience that you have and the advice that you've given us. I know we had a little glitch because my internet decided to go down partway through. So we'll make sure that we'll get that sorted in terms of the recording. And yes, I know that the website is down. We're getting that fixed, but we'll have this uploaded to the website later this week, and we'll put out an announcement to everyone. So thank you to everyone who attended the webinar, and thank you to all of the panelists. We really appreciate your time on this important topic.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.